Matt finally hauled the Fiat Alice 645B wheel loader onto his property after what felt like a rushed, almost improvised operation. It wasn't a polished equipment delivery or a carefully staged acquisition. It was the kind of moment that happens when timing, opportunity, and urgency collide. The machine itself looked tired, like it had lived several lifetimes before arriving here, yet it still carried potential under the layers of dust, grease, and neglect. For Matt, this wasn't just another piece of heavy equipment, it was another chance to bring something back from the edge of uselessness. The farm setting made the contrast even stronger. Quiet fields surrounded a machine built for destruction, excavation, and brute force. This arrival wasn't isolated either. It represented a pattern that had been building for years, forgotten machines being pulled out of obscurity and given another shot. Each recovery came with uncertainty. Would it run again? Would it even move? Or would it become another long-term project sitting in a growing collection of unfinished dreams? But that uncertainty was part of the appeal. The loader's arrival marked yet another chapter in a growing world where mechanical resurrection wasn't just work, it was purpose. A life built around broken steel and relentless work. Matt's world wasn't shaped by comfort or convenience. It was shaped by scrapyards, muddy job sites, and aging machines that most people would consider scrap. He didn't operate in clean, controlled environments. Instead, his daily reality involved frozen bolts, seized hydraulics, and machines that resisted every attempt at revival. The work wasn't glamorous. It was physical, unpredictable, and often frustrating. Yet it was also deeply satisfying in a way that only hands-on labor can be. Every machine carried its own history. Some had been abandoned after financial failure. Others were simply worn down by time and abuse. Matt approached each one not as junk, but as a problem worth solving. That mindset separated him from casual hobbyists. He wasn't there to admire machines. He was there to make them function again. Even when progress was slow or setbacks piled up, quitting was never the first option. The work itself became a form of identity, something built through repetition, persistence, and stubborn commitment to finishing what others had given up on. From construction struggles to an unexpected camera lens. Before any audience existed, there was simply survival. Matt's early working life revolved around construction jobs, equipment repair, and unstable income streams tied to whatever machinery he could fix next. A broken hydraulic line didn't just mean mechanical failure, it meant delayed pay and extended work hours. Bills didn't pause for breakdowns, neither did deadlines. During these years, the idea of filming anything wasn't planned or strategic, it was incidental. A camera appeared as a side tool, something to document repairs rather than perform for an audience. Early recordings were raw and unstructured, no scripting, no production planning, just repair work captured as it happened. The focus remained on solving mechanical problems, not entertaining viewers. But that authenticity would later become the foundation of something much larger. At the time, there was no expectation that anyone would care about the footage. It existed purely as documentation of effort. Yet those early moments would eventually evolve into something far bigger than a personal archive. They became the beginning of a public connection built on honesty, persistence, and unfiltered work. When simple repairs turned into public attention, the turning point came almost unintentionally. A few early restoration projects were uploaded without expectation. One machine, pulled from a swamp-like field, became unexpectedly functional again after being revived. That moment resonated far beyond what was anticipated. People responded not to perfection, but to effort. Viewership began to grow steadily, not because the work was polished, but because it was real. Machines were not cleaned up for presentation, problems were not hidden, mistakes were left in. Viewers watched machines fail, stall, and eventually come back to life through persistence. That transparency created a sense of trust. As attention increased, recognition followed. What had once been a private working routine became something visible to thousands, then millions. The shift wasn't just about popularity, it changed the relationship between work and audience. Every project now carried dual weight, the technical challenge of fixing machinery and the unspoken expectation of being watched while doing it. Scrutiny, opinions, and the pressure of being watched. With visibility came criticism. Viewers began analyzing methods, questioning decisions, and suggesting alternative approaches to repairs. Why reuse old parts instead of replacing them? Why take certain risks? Why not film things differently? These comments multiplied as the audience grew. Some were constructive, others dismissive. The internet, by nature, invites comparison and judgment. What had once been private problem-solving became public debate. Every weld, cut, or repair decision could be examined by hundreds of unseen voices. Despite this, the approach didn't change dramatically. The work remained grounded in practicality rather than performance. If a part could be repaired instead of replaced, it usually was. If a machine could be revived through effort rather than expense, that path was taken. The philosophy stayed consistent even as pressure increased. The challenge wasn't just mechanical anymore, it was psychological. Working under constant observation required resilience, especially when expectations began to rise alongside the audience. Expanding land, machines, and an uncontrolled vision. As projects multiplied, physical space became a necessity. A small working area could no longer contain the growing number of machines, parts, and unfinished builds. So land was acquired, not as decoration, but as functional necessity. That land quickly transformed into something larger than storage. It became a living workspace filled with machines in various states of decay and restoration. Excavators, loaders, trucks, and industrial equipment were scattered across open ground, each waiting for attention. Some were partially restored, others were untouched, still waiting for their turn. This expansion changed everything. Work was no longer confined to a single yard or small shop. It became an evolving landscape of mechanical resurrection. The space itself reflected the philosophy behind it. Nothing was too far gone, and nothing needed to be rushed. The land wasn't organized in a traditional sense. It was structured around opportunity. Whatever arrived next would find its place, eventually becoming part of a larger ongoing process. Building machines instead of just fixing them. One of the most defining projects involved constructing a sawmill from scratch. This wasn't a simple restoration. It was fabrication, engineering, and problem-solving combined into one large undertaking. Steel was cut, welded, and assembled into a functional system designed to process timber. The result was imperfect, loud, and visibly raw, but it worked. That was the point. The machine didn't need to look refined. It needed to function. Every vibration, adjustment, and correction was part of the process. Nothing was hidden from view. The sawmill represented a shift in mindset. It wasn't just about repairing what already existed anymore. It was about creating tools capable of enabling future work. It expanded what was possible on-site and reinforced the idea that building and fixing were part of the same philosophy. Function mattered more than appearance. Progress mattered more than polish. When growth becomes pressure instead of reward. As the audience expanded, expectations grew alongside it. Some weeks brought viral success, others brought silence and reduced engagement. That inconsistency is common in online platforms, but it still creates pressure. More viewers meant more responsibility. More projects meant tighter timelines. More attention meant less privacy. Even simple work sessions could feel different when knowing they might be recorded or watched later by thousands. At times, the workload became overwhelming. Multiple machines required attention simultaneously, each demanding time, tools, and focus. Balancing work with filming created an additional layer of complexity. Eventually, adjustments had to be made. Not everything needed to be recorded. Not every moment needed to become content. Some work returned to being private again, purely functional and uninterrupted. A community built on machines and meaning. Despite challenges, a strong community formed around the work. Viewers didn't just watch for entertainment, they watched for inspiration. Messages began arriving from mechanics, hobbyists, veterans, and people who simply enjoyed seeing broken things repaired. Some shared personal stories. Others sent tools, parts, or old manuals. Even worn-out equipment components arrived with notes asking if they could be used again. These gestures transformed the project from a one-way broadcast into something interactive. The machines became symbols of persistence. Each restoration represented the idea that damage isn't final. That belief resonated deeply with many people. Over time, the audience wasn't just observing repairs, they were emotionally invested in them. A massive abandoned machine and a test of limits. One of the most ambitious undertakings involved a large, abandoned industrial machine left unused for decades. It was heavily corroded, structurally compromised, and almost unrecognizable. Most people would have considered it beyond saving, but it was purchased anyway. Not for spectacle, but for challenge. The goal wasn't guaranteed success, it was exploration. Could something this far gone be revived? Could persistence overcome time and decay? The restoration process was slow and unpredictable. Every bolt resisted, every component required patience. Yet progress came gradually. Piece by piece, the machine began to resemble its original form again. This project became a defining example of the broader philosophy. Nothing is too broken to attempt fixing. A yard that slowly became a living archive of machines. Over time, the property stopped feeling like a simple workspace and started resembling something closer to a mechanical archive. Every machine that arrived carried its own history, and instead of disappearing into scrap yards or recycling piles, many of them stayed. They accumulated across the land in different states of decay and progress. Some were partially restored, their engines already revived and tested. Others remained frozen in time, still waiting for attention, their frames rusted but intact enough to suggest possibility. What made this place unusual wasn't just the number of machines, but the way they coexisted. A broken excavator might sit beside a functioning truck, while a disassembled loader rested nearby, waiting for parts that may or may not arrive. Nothing was staged or arranged for appearance. It was practical chaos, shaped by necessity rather than design. Yet within that disorder, a kind of structure emerged naturally. Everything had a reason for being there, even if that reason wasn't immediately visible to an outsider. The yard became more than storage. It became memory in physical form, each machine representing a decision, a challenge, or a moment of refusal to give up. The hidden difficulty behind every mechanical revival. From a distance, restoring old machinery might look straightforward. Replace broken parts, weld damaged sections, start the engine again. In reality, each project is layered with complications that don't reveal themselves until work begins. Bolts snap instead of turning, seals crumble into dust. Entire systems that once functioned seamlessly resist every attempt at revival. There is also the problem of uncertainty. Many machines arrive without full histories, no clear record of what failed or why it was abandoned. That means every repair begins with investigation rather than instruction. Diagnosis becomes as important as physical repair. Sometimes hours are spent simply understanding what should have taken minutes to fix. Weather, tool limitations, and material fatigue add further complications. A simple task can stretch into days. A planned repair can turn into a full rebuild. This unpredictability is part of the reality, not an exception. It demands patience, adaptability, and a willingness to accept that progress rarely follows a straight line. The evolution from solo work to a broader responsibility. At the beginning, everything depended on one person, one set of hands, one decision maker, one pace. But as the scope of work expanded, so did the responsibility attached to it. More machines meant more commitments. More viewers meant more expectations. Even though the work remained fundamentally independent, its impact extended outward. People began to rely on the process as inspiration. Some followed for entertainment, others for motivation, and some simply for the satisfaction of watching something broken become functional again. That shift created an unspoken responsibility to maintain consistency and honesty. Even decisions about what to repair next began to carry weight. Choosing one machine over another meant delaying something else. Time became a limited resource distributed across competing needs. The work was still physical, still hands-on, but now it existed within a broader ecosystem of attention, anticipation, and engagement. Machines that refused to die, and the philosophy behind them. A core belief developed through years of experience. Most machines are not truly finished when they stop working. They are simply interrupted. Failure is often the result of neglect, time, or minor breakdowns that accumulate into larger issues. This perspective changes how machines are approached. Instead of being treated as disposable, they are treated as recoverable until proven otherwise. That does not mean every project succeeds. Some machines remain beyond repair or require resources that exceed practical limits. But the starting assumption is always possibility. This mindset also reflects a broader philosophy about effort. Just as machines can be brought back with enough patience and skill, difficult problems in general often respond to persistence rather than abandonment. The work becomes a reminder that breakdown is not finality, it is just another stage in a longer cycle. The emotional weight of watching things break during repair. One of the most difficult aspects of the work is not initial damage, but secondary failure during repair. A part that looks salvageable might crack under pressure. A system that seems ready for testing might fail immediately upon startup. These moments carry a particular frustration because they occur after time, effort, and expectation have already been invested. Yet these setbacks are unavoidable. Age-weakened materials behave unpredictably. Hidden stress points reveal themselves only when force is applied. Even careful planning cannot eliminate all risk. What makes these moments impactful is not just the technical setback, but the emotional reaction. There is a natural tension between hope and frustration. However, rather than ending the process, these failures often become turning points. They reveal deeper issues that would have caused larger problems later. In that sense, even failure becomes part of progress. The growth of a name that became larger than one person. As time passed, the name associated with the work began to carry meaning beyond the individual behind it. It became shorthand for a certain type of content, raw, unfiltered mechanical restoration grounded in real labor rather than performance. People began referencing it not just as a channel, but as a style and even a mindset. It represented persistence, patience, and refusal to discard things too quickly. Merchandise, messages, and community discussions expanded the identity further, turning it into something collective rather than solitary. This growth created an interesting contrast. On one hand, the work remained deeply personal and hands-on. On the other, it had become a shared symbol interpreted by thousands of people in different ways. Balancing those two realities required maintaining authenticity while navigating increasing visibility. When criticism becomes part of the background noise, with visibility comes scrutiny. Every decision, method, and outcome can be analyzed by viewers with varying levels of expertise. Some feedback is thoughtful and constructive. Other comments are speculative or dismissive. Over time, this mixture becomes constant background noise. Learning to function within that environment is part of the process. It requires filtering useful insight from unnecessary distraction. Not every suggestion improves the work, and not every criticism reflects understanding of the constraints involved. The most important adjustment is internal. Decisions cannot be driven by external approval alone. If they are, the work loses its grounding. Instead, practical outcomes become the primary measure of success. Does the machine run? Does the repair hold? Those answers matter more than commentary threads. The quiet periods when progress replaces visibility. There are phases where work continues intensely, but visibility decreases. Projects require focus that does not always translate into frequent updates. During these periods, the yard continues to evolve, machines are repaired, and progress is made, but the pace of sharing slows. These quieter stretches are often misunderstood from the outside. Lack of uploads can be mistaken for inactivity, when in reality, work may be at its most demanding stage. Large repairs, structural rebuilds, and long-term projects require uninterrupted attention. This separation between work and visibility becomes important for sustainability. Not every moment needs to be documented. Some progress only happens when the camera is absent and focus is absolute. A landscape defined by effort rather than appearance. The property itself reflects a philosophy that prioritizes function over aesthetics. It is not arranged for visual appeal. It is shaped by necessity. Machines sit where they are needed, not where they look best. Tools remain close to active projects. Scrap piles exist alongside functioning equipment because future usefulness is always possible. To an outsider, it may appear disorganized. To someone familiar with the work, it is a system built around efficiency and accessibility. Everything present has either current or potential value. Nothing is discarded without consideration. This approach turns the land into something dynamic rather than static. It is constantly changing, shaped by ongoing work rather than fixed design. A culture of repair that extends beyond machines. Over time, the meaning of the work expands beyond equipment. It becomes symbolic for persistence in general. People watching the process often interpret it as encouragement to address their own unfinished problems, whether mechanical, personal, or professional. The act of restoring something broken becomes a metaphor for persistence in other areas of life. Not because machines and people are the same, but because the mindset behind repair applies broadly. Observe the problem, understand it, work through it step by step, and accept that progress takes time. This interpretation is not forced. It emerges naturally from repeated exposure to long, difficult projects that eventually succeed through effort rather than shortcuts. The ongoing cycle of breakdown and recovery. No machine stays fixed forever. Even restored equipment eventually requires maintenance, adjustment, or repair again. This creates a continuous cycle rather than a final endpoint. That cycle becomes central to the entire environment. Breakdowns are not failures of the system, they are part of its normal rhythm. Recovery is expected, not exceptional. Each machine exists within a longer timeline of use, damage, repair, and reuse. This perspective removes finality from the process. Nothing is ever permanently solved. Everything is always in a state of becoming functional again or becoming non-functional once more. The perspective gained from standing still for a moment. At some point, stepping back becomes as important as moving forward. Observing the yard from a distance reveals patterns that are not visible during active work. Progress becomes more apparent when not measured hour by hour. Standing still does not mean stopping. It means recognizing scale. Machines that once seemed impossible to fix are now operational. Projects that once felt overwhelming have been completed. Even unfinished work represents movement rather than stagnation. This perspective helps reframe effort. Instead of focusing only on what remains undone, attention shifts to what has already been achieved through sustained work. Conclusion: a quiet bench, facing a yard full of possibilities. Eventually, the pace shifted again. Not everything needed to be constant motion. Not every project required urgency. A simple bench was built overlooking the equipment yard, a place to observe rather than act. From there, the entire landscape could be seen: machines waiting, projects in progress, and others already completed. It wasn't a display of success, but of ongoing work, a reminder that nothing here was ever truly finished. The bench represented perspective, a pause without stopping, a recognition that the process itself mattered more than any single outcome. Machines would continue to arrive, some would run again, others would challenge expectations, but the underlying principle remained unchanged. Broken things still have potential, and effort still has value.